Welcome to our webinar, African Roots webinar. This is 7th edition, and thank you for always join our webinar. So today we will talk about heritage, and we have two speakers, Mr. Dwani Jetro. He is from Department of African Studies and Linguistics, University of Cape Town, South Africa, and Mr. Fajar Ibnu Tufail. He is our head of Research Center for Area Studies, and he will talk about digital ontologies of Borobudur. And sorry, Mr. Dwani will talk about heritage work, co-curating the Jagger Library Memorial Exhibition. This webinar will lead by Miss Lide from African Studies Center Leiden University. So, Lide, can you start this discussion, please? Your floor. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, and very welcome to the 7th, indeed already, African Roots webinar series. It's a monthly series, or at least we try to have one at least every month. And as mentioned, it's organized by the Research Center for Area Studies of the National Research and Innovation Agency of Indonesia, BRIN, and the African Studies Center Leiden is represented by me. And today I have the honor and privilege to chair this meeting with two excellent speakers with, I think, very exciting presentations. And the aim always of our African Studies, African Roots webinar series is also to stimulate a dialogue between scholars from doing research on Africa or in different parts of the world. So today we have, I think, some very nice presentations looking at heritage work in different ways in Indonesia and in South Africa. So the first speaker, as mentioned already by my colleague in Indonesia, Angela, is Dwayne Jethro. And he works on the intersections of museums, heritage, religion, the secular and the sacred, while his expertise lies in the analysis of cultural construction of heritage and contested public cultures. He will talk to us today about the moment, or what followed after his research and personal experience collapsed when the University of Cape Town Jagger Library and Archive went up in flames. His talk is entitled Heritage Work, Co-Curating the Jagger Library Memorial Exhibition. Dwayne, whenever you are ready, the floor is yours. It seems at this very moment, this connection is frozen.
And thank you to the team for the invitation. It's really wonderful to be here. I'm going to try and share my screen. Can you hear me? Just to check,
yes, we hear you. Yes, yeah.
Brilliant. So I'm going to try and share my screen. Pull up my presentation. 1 second. Doesn't seem to be coming up.
Shall we try to share it from this side?
Maybe, yeah, if you can, if it's possible, I can just cycle through the slides in that way, and then I can just ask you to change the slides.
Fantastic. Helmi, have you got it, or Angela?
Thank you, Helmi. This is the last slide. I think we have to go to the very first one at the top. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. So my name is Dwayne Jethro. I work as a lecturer in the Department of African Studies and Linguistics at the University of Cape Town. I'll be talking about a project that I collaborated on with a colleague of mine, Jade Nair, from the Michaelis School of Fine Art. She is the curator of the Michaelis Galleries, as well as the University of Cape Town Libraries. It was a project that was initiated in 2021 and launched in 2022, exactly 1 year after a disaster occurred at the University of Cape Town. You can go to the next slide, please, Helmi. So on the 18th of April, 2021, we received the shocking news that a wildfire had been burning on the mountain just above the University of Cape Town upper campus. The wildfire continued to burn throughout the afternoon, and as this event unfolded, we started receiving frantic text messages from colleagues about the fire having spread down to the University of Cape Town upper campus itself. There are many buildings on the university upper campus, but one of the most important buildings is the library complex that is there. And amidst the library complex with a number of different divisions is the Jagger Library itself. The Jagger Library housed I'll talk a little bit more about the contents of the Jagger Library itself in the next few slides. But basically it held the African Studies collections, print collections, as well as archival deposits in the basement below. On that afternoon, that Sunday afternoon, these were some of the images that came back to us, both from the news media as well as from colleagues who were either on site or sharing the information. In this third slide, we see the image of the devastation that was wrought by the fire on the Monday morning. After the fire had been extinguished, you can see what was a beautiful reading room absolutely destroyed. The print collections, as well as all the furnishings inside the building, totally destroyed. It was a really devastating moment for the University of Cape Town, for colleagues, for the University of Cape Town libraries, staff who actually worked in this building, but also for our students as well. So to move on to the fourth slide, thank you, Helmi. Can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So this is the slide. I think there's a little bit of a delay.
There is a small delay, but we see the slides moving forward.
That's important. So in the previous slide, you would have seen that very quickly that the many collections that we have inside the Jagger building itself. This one, thank you. So the Jagger Library housed both primary and published collections, so books as well as archival deposits, images, newspaper collections, pamphlet collections, unusual collections. The published works were kept in the shelves on the upper floors, as well as in the reading room itself. And the archival deposits, not only of the unusual materials, but also collections of journals, were kept in other stores, both below the reading room and in stores adjacent around the reading room. Here you get a summary of some of the materials that were kept inside the reading room by Clive Kirkwood. an employee of the University of Cape Town Libraries. And here you have an image of what the Jagger Reading Room actually looked like. The Jagger Library was also the oldest library building on the University of Cape Town Upper Campus. I think it was built in the 1930s, and it received its name from a patron who had donated the funds for the building of this specific library. While it was the first specific library building on Upper Campus, as I mentioned earlier on, there are 7 total divisions of the library. So there's the engineering library, John Searle Oppenheimer library, many other libraries as well. But what's most important about the Jagger Library is that it was the home of special collections, so unusual, rare collections of materials, including the African Studies material. So of all of the prize collections that the University of Cape Town kept in terms of archival deposits and materials, it was the Jagger Library that held most of these really important collections. So it was a major tragedy that it was this building that was struck. You can move to the next slide, please, Helmi. So immediately after the Jagger Library was destroyed, the University of Cape Town UCT Libraries initiated a salvage and recovery project. This was aimed at making sure, firstly assessing the damage on the University of Cape Town library site, and trying to make an assessment of the materials that were lost as well as the materials that were salvageable. So when University of Cape Town Libraries employees entered the Jagger Library building, the reading room after the fire had been extinguished, they descended into the water that had been used to extinguish the blaze, had seeped down through the reading room floor, in them having to make a decision as to what to do. And they decided that the basement stores needed to be evacuated quite urgently in order to preserve the materials that were still kept there, and that surprisingly were still safe. They weren't affected by the fire, but they were now affected by the water that had been used to douse the flames. The salvage operation was initiated under the leadership of the UCT Libraries. It started on the 20th of April and ran until the 9th of May. And it required the removal of all of this material on the shelves down in the basement stores. It also encompassed some of the work of stabilizing the building, such as the reading room above, because the structures had been damaged by the fire. And it required a lot of physical manpower because of the tight spaces in which they needed to work. You couldn't get any equipment inside the specific archival store, and everything needed to be removed systematically from the shelves by hand. You can move to the next slide, please, Helmi. So the scale of the operation was quite vast, and many of the employees in UCT Libraries Special Collections Department weren't very familiar with the quantity of material that was actually kept inside the salvage store, inside the archival stores. And ultimately, once the salvage had been completed, as the executive director of UCT Libraries, Ujala Satko, explained, it required an army of 2,000 volunteers who worked on very tight systematic schedules on a daily basis under the leadership of UCT Libraries to remove all of the materials from the archival stores. So this image shows you how the materials were firstly removed and then carted outside of the archival stores. So it needed to be passed by hand and in a very systematic fashion in order to maintain the shelf order of the material that had been kept there. Besides the physical work of actually salvaging and removing the material from the Jagger Library stores, there was also some emergency conservation work that needed to be done. Please move to the next slide, Helmi. So while most of the material had been recovered from the archival stores, some of the material unfortunately had gotten wet in the process of dousing the fires, and this material was quickly identified in the process of actually removing the materials from the basement stores, and it was moved to a special marquee tent that was set up for emergency conservation. The marquee tent was called the triage tent, and in the triage tent, all kinds of emergency assessment and conservation work was done on wet materials, such as collections of negatives, maps, books, etc., that had either gotten wet or damaged in the process of dousing the fire. And here you can see a conservator as well as the former director of the Center for Curating the Archive, Purpose Cottonus, looking over negatives that are being dried inside the conservation tent. Some of the processes that took place in the triage tent were drying of the wet materials using hair dryers and other processes, the spraying of books for mold, wrapping the materials, and preparing some of the materials for freezing. So freezing the material in order to restrict the spread of mold in these materials, and for defrosting later, and for further conservation work at a later time. What's interesting about this particular process, at least from an anthropological perspective, is the anthropomorphizing of archival materials as damaged and requiring emergency assessment in the same ways that you find at sites of disaster. So thank you, Helmi. So it was in the wake of this disaster on the 18th of April 2021 that my colleague Jade Ney contacted me from the Michaelis Galleries about the idea of initiating a project, specifically an exhibition, to both memorialize the loss of the library, so to mark this significant historical event in our intellectual community among students, but also residents of Cape Town and colleagues at the University of Cape Town, and to commemorate and celebrate both UCT libraries as initiating this important salvage and recovery project, and the many volunteers that had participated in the salvage of the library. So at the same time that the library was a great disaster for our community, the salvage and recovery operation also opened a space for that same community to participate in the recovery of that archive and to reconstitute it in some ways. And it was through this collaboration, both with Jade Ney and UCT libraries, that I became involved in this project. And we settled on the idea of an exhibition, and we came up with the idea for the title called Of Smoke and Ash, the Jagger Library Memorial Exhibition, to try and engage with this disaster and bring out these different facets of what had happened, but also the communal processes that led to the salvage and recovery of the archive. You can move to the next slide. In what follows, I'll just briefly sketch out some of the elements of the exhibition itself. So one of the things that we found really important for this exhibition was that we wanted to work with physical objects from UCT library. We thought that was really important. So things like burnt books, burnt furnishings, things that were directly marked by this disaster, and we wanted to include that in the exhibition. We also identified that UCT libraries did a really excellent job of documenting the salvage and recovery operations. So UCT libraries had recognized the importance of keeping a record of the salvage and recovery operation as part of the institutional memory. And so we wanted to draw on some of that documentation work. But then we were also curious about, we were also curious about volunteer participation in the salvage and recovery operations. Why did people feel drawn to this process? What kinds of emotions did they bring to the salvage and recovery? What did they think they were recovering, and what did they think they were participating in as well? So we were interested in volunteer perspectives. And then, because at the time I was working at the Center for Curating the Archive, and Jade was also based at the Michaelis. Jade is and was based at the Michaelis School of Fine Art. We were also interested in the ways in which art students were thinking about and engaging with the loss of the library itself also. And so we wanted to incorporate some kind of incorporate graduate student art projects in this exhibition. You can move to the next slide. So these were the different elements that we wanted to draw on in creating an exhibition that was reflective of the disaster, but also commemorating the communal work of the community in participating in the salvage and recovery operation. If you can, thanks, Almi. So in order to solicit the perspectives and opinions of the many volunteers who were involved, Jade and I initiated a online archival project, like a small archival project where we set up an archival store on the University of Cape Town's digital repositories called eBali. And we asked an open question. We posed an open question to the volunteers who had participated. We negotiated with UCT libraries to have access to their database of volunteers, and we appealed to the volunteers to respond to the question, what did the salvage mean to you? We just asked an open question. What did this mean to you to participate in this salvage operation? People could scan the QR code and make a submission, and submissions could vary from simple images to short texts, anything that volunteers wanted to share in response to this open question of what the salvage actually meant to them. You can move to the next slide, Almi. I will return to reflect on what those submissions actually looked like a little bit later on, but just to move into quite quickly into what the exhibition actually turned out to look like. This was the exterior of the Michaelis Galleries where we held the memorial exhibition. Also, it's important to stress that in order to mark the commemorative aspects of the exhibition, we timed it to coincide with the 1-year anniversary of the disaster, so that people could really take in exactly 1 year later exactly what had happened and reflect on that. So the memorial and the commemorative aspects were really emphasized through the timing of the exhibition. That was really important. In the image that you see before you, you see 3-color photographic work by a Michaelis graduate student named Eugene van der Merwe. And Eugene just so happened to be taking long exposure photographs on the day of the fire. And in the center image, you can see what is called Devil's Peak and the fire burning on that Sunday afternoon coming down onto the University of Cape Town. So wanted to place these images on the exterior of the building as a kind of entry point into into the exhibition, but also as a way of thinking about dynamics around climate change, landscape, environment, and the location of the university in this landscape, and the devastation that can be caused by fire. You can move on to the next slide, please, Helmi. At the very entrance of the exhibition, you can see the title on the right hand side, and below the title you'll see 3 crates that were actually used in the salvage and recovery. On top of the crate we placed a box of ash, because ash became a really powerful motif during the salvage and recovery operations, for thinking about both grief and loss, and that which had been lost, and the trace of the text also. So these were some of the symbolic and material resonances of the ash itself. So we placed a box of ash at the entrance, which also served as a kind of exit point, because people enter and exit from the same point of entry. On the left hand side, you see the salvage and recovery timeline. We use this timeline as a kind of guide into the exhibition. It's used panels drawn directly from University of the UCT Library's website, their documentation of the different processes that occurred on different days during the salvage and recovery operation itself. So this is what the entrance looked like. Helmi, you can move to the next slide, please. As we continue moving into the entranceway, on the right hand side, as the slide comes up, you can see one of the window grates that the firemen had to break through in order to get into the building. We used the window grate. We recovered the window grate, repaired it, and mounted it here as a space for visitors to pin their reflections on. I'll get to some of these reflections, the little notes that they left on the window grates. In the foreground, you can see some more crates, as well as the original image taken by one of the UCT librarians documenting the salvage and recovery process itself. You can move to the next slide, please, Helmi. As we continue into the exhibition, here you can see the centerpiece of the exhibition. We used images taken by UCT libraries themselves. On the distant wall in the background, you can see that. On the left-hand side, on the far distant left-hand side, you can see a shelf of books that were burned and preserved in quite neat order. And in the very far distance, you can see a fire extinguisher that was also recovered. But of course, what's most significant about this image and the installation that you see in the center, this is a kind of debris sculpture. So it uses the packing crates that were used in the salvage and recovery, and the packing crates were stacked with debris and material that were recovered from the site, material that wasn't useful archivally anymore, but stacked up in this way, in an unfinished way, and brought together in this way. The debris sculpture enabled a multi-perspectival view into the loss of the Jagger library and the fleeting work of actually trying to salvage an archive that had been damaged in some way. So it served a really important purpose in the very center of the exhibition space itself. You can move to the next slide, please, Helmi. As I mentioned earlier on, we drew on graduate work also, and we tried to draw graduates from the Michaelis School of Fine Art into participating in um, sharing their perspectives and drawing new perspectives on the disaster. So here you can see a visitor looking through a cabinet that was recovered from the Jagger Library site. It originally housed architectural drawings from the Jagger Library site, and we thought it was really evocative because some of the cabinet drawers had been rusted in the process of getting wet, and we asked these 5 students, Paige Aitner Vosloo, these 4 students, Paige Aitner Vosloo, Kiara Dunsby, Zenaika Singh, and Chloe Spreckley, to try and engage with this cabinet. And what they did was they took some scans of architectural drawings that had been burned, and then they developed their own newsprints out of these scans, and they placed these scans inside the different drawers. And then they invited visitors to remove the prints that they produced as mementos, but also to write something and to deposit deposit it back into the cabinet itself. So in this installation, you see the kind of reversal of the archival principle, where you get to remove materials and take it away, but you also get to deposit something. So archives and libraries don't necessarily allow that kind of engagement. The students also invited visitors to the installation to think about how materials are stored, how valuable materials are stored, and what kinds of materials are allowed to be stored inside university library archival spaces. You can move to the next slide, Helmi. So I only have a few more slides left to go, but I hope you're getting some insight not only into the exhibition, but also how we try to create an immersive environment, a rich and engaging artistic environment for not only representing the disaster, but also for thinking about the significance of the disaster and for rethinking the Jagger Library itself. This image is just of the students on reconnaissance inside the Jagger Library building, inside the basement store specifically, identifying materials that they wanted to use inside the exhibition, and their sense of curiosity and how they actually worked with the materials. You can move to the next slide, please, Almi. This video installation, Sky in the Library, was also by a graduate student and our curatorial assistant, Sophie Cope. Sophie had recovered some of these blue star maps from the debris that was left over after the recovery of the Jagger Library. And she juxtaposed the blue star maps with images of the sky taken through the burnt out roof of the Jagger Library, thinking about ideas of the openness of the sky and the connections between the practice of documenting star constellations and the keeping of these records, and trying to think about this through this specific video installation, or not really a video installation, but an installation of juxtaposed images. You can move to the next slide, please, Almi. And then one of the other graduate installations that I wanted to draw attention to was Weight of Loss by Laurel Holmes. On the wall, you can see the shadow of burnt books. And so Laurel Holmes homes, placed books on the wall, and she created a kind of dust through using a kind of dust effect, created the shadows of books, so representing the books that had been lost. And in some of the images from the Jagger Library itself after the disaster, you can see these shadows of where books had been placed. So you get the sense of absence and presence through this specific installation. It's not very clear through this image, but on the floor in front of the shadow sculpture, or the shadow image, is a set of ceramic boxes, also empty ceramic boxes that were embossed with the codes of book entries, and through these the ceramic works, she's also playing with the idea of absence, presence, memory, and loss. You can move to the next slide, please, Almi. So earlier on in my presentation, I mentioned that JD and I solicited some responses from the volunteers as to what they thought about the salvage and what the salvage actually meant to them. We gathered over 30 responses of all kinds from groups and individuals from varying ages and professions. These included poems, short reflections, images, etc., that they'd taken as part of the volunteer, as part of their volunteer work. And we collated this into a volunteer book of memory. This is an open access book. So if you want to access the book, you can go to the Jagger Library Memorial Exhibition website. It's very easy to access. And if you go onto the website, you can access the book. It's called What Remains: Volunteer Memories of the Jagger Library Jagger Library Salvage Operation. And we included all of the submissions in a largely unedited fashion, just with a little preface in the beginning, just to leave it open-ended so that members of the public can get some more insight into into what moved participants into engaging in the salvage and recovery operation, and what it meant to them as well. You can move to the next slide, please, Almi. So for me, it was really striking to work on a project like this, primarily because I'm a scholar of heritage. I look at the cultural construction of heritage and contested public cultures. So I'm often analyzing case studies that are outside of my institution, that are quite public facing, and that have social and cultural significance for a particular society. And in the case of the Jagger Library disaster, it was my own institution that was affected by a disaster that was of historic significance. Participating in the development of the exhibition was a space for me to bring my own set of skills and knowledge to a project like this, to actively engage in the process of memorialization as well as commemoration as well. And I find that an interesting space. It was a really interesting space for me to work in and engage on, and something I still reflect on. But to return to the exhibition itself and the significance of the exhibition as a kind of project that allows for different perspectives on a disaster like this, I think the importance of the exhibition related to the collaborative nature that was woven into the project. So it was a collaboration between different stakeholders at the university. We also tried to emphasize that the collaboration was internal. So we tried to work with partners at the University of Cape Town before trying to broaden and work with other people. So it was mostly internal. It was quite integrative. So we drew together skills from different fields, but also tried to weave in the work of exhibition making into things like teaching, research, as well as the curation of the exhibition itself. We thought that the exhibition was also informative. So we wanted to draw attention to different aspects of the library during and after the disaster. And so draw attention to this important institution through the exhibition. And ultimately, I think one of the great successes of the exhibition was that it was so highly generative. We not only produced a physical exhibition, we produced a website with all of the documentation of the exhibition itself. We produced a volunteer book of memory. We used the exhibition as a space for teaching and learning. So out of the disaster itself came all of these different outputs that I think is really important for rethinking the institution of the library itself, as well as the disaster, and the important work, the important communal work of actually engaging in salvage and recovery work when a disaster like this strikes. So thank you so much for your patience and for your time, and I hope it was a stimulating talk.
Thank you so much, Dwayne. This was really interesting. And I was wondering, perhaps you want to put in the chat also the website that you created, because I think it might be interesting for us to look at that later again. Your presentation really drew us to the work and the technologies that go into, but also shape the kind of the heritage that is there. And I think that's also a nice way to go to our next presentation. But before that, I thought just to give an example of how technologies are important. There was a bit of a delay in our in the slides and the talk. And for me, this kind of created a very serene aura, maybe emphasizing this memorialization of the exhibition that you created. So I thought that was interesting to notice. Our next presentation is by Dr. Fajar Itu Tufail, or Pak Fajar if we use Bahasa Indonesia, Mas Fajar if we use the Java style. As mentioned already, he's the director of the Institute for Area Studies at BRIN. He received his master's from Rutgers University, his PhD from the University of Wisconsin. He was a fellow at the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology in Halle, at Göttingen University and Tokyo University, as well as the University of Tokyo. So he, like Dwayne, spent a lot of time working abroad, and now he's working in Jakarta. And his interests span a wide variety, I have to say, fascinating and important topics, including animation and game productions, maritime network, focusing on human and non-human relationships, and digital visualization and cultural heritage. And about this latter project, or this latter interest, he will talk today. His work on digitizing heritage of the world-famous Borobudur Buddhist temple on Java Island. And his talk is titled Digital Ontologies of Borobudur.
Yes, thank you, Lydia, for this nice presentation, and good afternoon, everybody. Maybe good morning in the Netherlands, and also good afternoon in South Africa. What the material of my presentation today, probably some of our colleagues have already learned about this, but I think this is something that I even rarely presenting in Indonesia. So probably for some of them, from some of my colleagues, this is also a new information. So yes, allow me to share screen, and then after that, allow me to close my camera, because this internet connection here is sometimes unstable. The bandwidth is very small, and so it's better for me to close the camera while presenting slides. So, okay, let me share the screen. Okay, I hope you can see this already.
Yes, we do.
Let me start. Yeah. Okay, so this project of digitizing Borobudur is a collaborative project carried out by myself and our center with the Ritsumeikan University in Japan. So the aim of this project is actually to record the Borobudur temple using a photogrammetry technology, and we plan to record all part of the Borobudur. So this will be a long-term project, and then create 3-dimension models to visualize Borobudur in 3-dimension models. And at present, we started the project in 2018, but due to the pandemic, the project was halted, and then we just started to resume the project this year, and since 2018 up to now, we have managed to record 2 layers of the temples, and to visualize 2 layers of the temples, 2 floors, and then we also managed to convert the pictures of this hidden Karma Vibhanga relief, and visualize that, convert that into 3-dimension model using machine learning and artificial intelligence. So why Borobudur? As Lide has already mentioned, this temple is a very important building. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. One of the earliest UNESCO World Heritage Sites was listed in 1991, and then therefore it is very important to conserve the monument. And as part of this aims to conservation aims, then the digital technology plays a very important role in heritage management and research. But we cannot do it by ourselves, so that's why we need to collaborate with experts, and that's why we collaborate with Ritsumeikan computer scientist expert that are specializing on heritage modeling and heritage database and heritage recording.
The slide is fridge.
Okay, so
It's frozen.
okay, let's see. This is something that happens often in our building. Okay. Wait a minute. Okay, let me try to share this. Can you see this, the slide, the second slide?
Yes, we see the
Yes.
second slide.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so just let me know if the slide is frozen again. Okay, so in Indonesia, the implementation of digital technology is actually just limited to documentations, and we haven't carried out some things beyond that, just simply documenting the building, the monuments. And in fact, that the digitization it's not only a technical event, but also an interpretive event. So this is kind of things that we are trying to develop in our project, that using the digitations not only as a ways to record or document the building and preserve the building, but also as a ways for us to to make kind of an analysis of these processes of digitation as an interpretive event. So this is something that has never been done in Indonesia. So that's why this project, we have two part of the project. The first one is documentation, and the second one is the different kinds of analysis, including interpretive analysis. Okay, can you see this slide?
Yes,
Is it moving? Yeah.
it is moving.
Yeah. So so that's why what I mean with the ontology or ontological work in digitizing is that this kind of things, when we are producing the digital world, we are not only representing the object as it is. So people always saying, digitations or digitalization is only a part of the representational practices, but actually this is a part of where we carried out our relations between ourselves, humans, our environment, and the non-human beings. For example, the monuments. So the part of these practices is sometimes get lost in the notion of digitalization as a representational practice. So we are trying to kind of go into a more detail and looking at how these processes of digitization is actually social processes of relating to this building and to the environment. Okay. Yeah, and Borobudur case, we actually have identified at least there are three different ontologies. The first one is the digital ontologies, and it produces the things like the modeling algorithms involved in creating the models. And the second one is the cultural ontologies, in the way how like people, the local community in around Borobudur relate to the building through rituals, through some kind of art performances and so forth. And the third one is the political ontologies, and in which all of these activities or all of these kind of practices of digital creations and also cultural ontology are being carried out within a certain political context. So, and this is quite important for us because it connects what we understand as a non-representational practice like this, ritual and something with this kind of a representational practice of creating the digital ontologies. So this is something that we are trying to examine, or we are trying to understand in the process of digitizing Borobudur. So just to give you a brief history of cultural management practices related to Borobudur, and the Borobudur, the practice of analog photogrammetric recording actually started in quite early in 1970s, and with some help from France and also the Netherlands, and also the UNESCO and Japan. So this is part of the reconstruction project of the Borobudur 1973 until 1983, where the temple was dismantled and then cleaned and also rearranged. And this project, it's a very big project carried out by the Indonesian government with the assistance from UNESCO and also from other countries. But in the context of digital recording, not only in relation to Borobudur, but also in the context of digital recording of heritage monuments in Indonesia, the first digital recording was actually carried out not a very long time ago in 2005, and with the arrival of the terrestrial laser scanning, which was the grant and given by the UNESCO. And then the first training by this UNESCO, training the Borobudur staff in TLS work was carried out in 2006. And then since then, the application of digital recording to other heritage sites in other parts of Indonesia were carried out by these Borobudur staff who have received the training. And the digital photogrammetry of Borobudur, the first one was initiated in 2009, but that was the effort was kind of did not continue until 2017 because of this problem of lack of manpower, and also some of the equipment were broken. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, that there are different kind of ontologies. What is really important in the context of Borobudur, apart from digital ontology, is this cultural ontologies. And the cultural ontologies and also the digital ontologies actually kind of put it's a put in a related space. When you see, for example, like some of these cultural performance were put and were on the YouTube, and YouTube as a digital technology, it enables Borobudur to be experienced as a cultural landscape. So if you try to look at these several channels on YouTube, you will find this a lot of rituals carried out, and also and the most important ritual is this Ruat Rawat Borobudur. So these are these the YouTube channels related to this Ruat Rawat Borobudur, and if you can see that there are numbers of films. They put numbers of films and on the YouTube channels, and these are only part of this recording, but they're having many kind others recording. But if you pay a more closer attention to these channels, you can see there are some, Borobudur is located in Java, in central Java, but you can also see that several representations, several performances, art performance that has a connection to other part of this Indonesia, the other cultural context. Such as when I was in Borobudur a couple months ago, and then there was a performance also of the Bali Lea. And the Bali, as you know, it's not Javanese cultures, but they are bringing the Bali also to Borobudur, and then consider that as a kind of cultural context that are connected also to Borobudur. So it's digitalization is also one part of practice of digitalization. The important part of digitalization is actually using digitalization as a database. So in that way, that Borobudur is is part of the National Heritage Database, and also Borobudur has been named as one of the UNESCO's Memory of the World Archive, and that's why by putting Borobudur in the context of this political landscape, then you locate the temple as part of the archaeological sites and national and global discourses of heritage. So in that sense, Borobudur is not only stands as a temple created by people in the 8th and 9th century Java, but also now it's becoming one of the monuments recognized in the context of national and global discourses of heritage. Yeah, this is just to give you some example of this the distribution of Buddhist and Hindu temples, and the red one is the temples made out of bricks, and the green one it's a temple made out of the volcanic rocks. Yeah, this is one of the project that we're doing. It's to do a semantic segmentation of these 3D models. And for example, here we are trying to segment the representations or the relief of houses, and then we do it by we create our colleague at Ritsumeikan create algorithms to recognize the pattern of the houses in the relief, and then later on we can just kind of extract these the pictures or the models of the building and separate that from other pictures that are found in the reliefs. But this process is now still going on, and then we need to do more training on the machine to recognize the different pattern that we can call the pattern the house. And also we are planning to do semantic segmentation on the everyday objects, like here we can terracotta balls there are also found in on this relief, but there's the people are still making this kind of terracotta balls, and we want to also to try to understand this kind of the type of the shape of the object, and to what extent the use the relief can help us to understand the use of this object and so forth. So semantic segmentation will be helpful to highlight this object. This is another example of this object, and here is just a few examples of three-dimensional visualization that we have been processing with this our Ritsumeikan colleagues, and this is early part of the visualization, so the picture is still rough, and we are hoping to have to create a better visualization in the next stage of the process. But I heard that from our colleague that they are already they have now better visualization image of this temple. Yeah, this is our visualization created by photogrammetry record, part of this visualizations of these relief panels. And the slide on the right is our attempt to convert 2D monocular photos into 3D models. And this is some that I already mentioned earlier, that we use deep learning technology and to understand the depth map, and then from that we create these algorithms to convert the 2D monocular photos into the 3D point cloud. Yeah, and this one is the example of our attempt to visualize the global temple. So this is the global temple and its surrounding. So we are trying to create one of these finding is the transparent visualization, in which you can also see the inner part of the Borobudur. But we are using this. We are creating this transparent visualization by combining all of this, all of the data that we have. For example, like the data on the small mound that are that we already found under the building, and we combine that data into with this global laser scanning, and then create this transparent visualizations. Yeah, I think I just passed this. As I mentioned earlier, this is the digital humanities models for cultural heritage that we develop in relation to Borobudurs. We have, in terms of the political ontology, we have different kinds of institutional layering, from the regional one, and then from the national and the locals. And also we have these more concrete projects that consist of the conservations and also semantic segmentation. And the third one that we are now preparing to carry it out this year is the digital testimonies that create the memories of this reconstruction project in 1973 until 1983, the project that were sponsored and carried out by the help of the UNESCO. Again, that's it. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Lydie.
Thank you very much for this very fascinating presentation. When I was in Yogyakarta, I took the opportunity to visit Borobudur, but I think today I learned even much more about it. Very nice also to see these presentations. As the chair, I will take the privilege to ask you the first questions before I open the floor. I have questions to both of you. I think both presentations really speak nicely how from a researcher you've also become involved in shaping a heritage that is being saved in some ways in digital forms or in other forms. And I was wondering, because in a recent trend, you're both anthropologists by background, and maybe you no longer identify as such, but I see that in anthropology, also ethnography is becoming something that is very, that is a new trend. So thinking also about what, if you would reflect on your own role as a maker or as working on heritage rather than studying heritage, I was wondering what kind of new insights this brings to your work, and whether you would change your role as researcher based on your own role as someone who works on heritage and is involved in making some of the decisions and has to work with the technologies also that you are usually studying, but that are now part of your activities. And the second question, and maybe particularly for Pak Fajar, is that I'm curious on what you think this experience or this new ways of digitizing Borobudur, what it will generate. We heard Dwayne reflect on how during with the exhibition, it was a very generative event, and it generated all kinds of new ways of relationships, art pieces, a website. What will this digitized formats of Borobudur? What will it bring? What will it do to the heritage that is that we now know as the Borobudur heritage? And then finally, my question is perhaps especially for Dwayne. In the beginning, you spoke also about the many volunteers that were involved in doing this work, and how also in the exhibition that you prepared, you involved a lot of the public, internal public, and that this, you mentioned it as a community. So I was wondering how now, what is this community that was so involved, and will it continue to live despite the absence of the archives, the library, or will it take different shapes? So I was curious if you can reflect also on that aftermath for the community that was kind of brought into life or became visible through these events. So I'm not sure who wants to start. Who of you?
I think if it's fine, Fajar, I'd like to take the first question. And firstly, I found your presentation so fascinating, and the biggest takeaway for me was this idea of conservation as a research practice. So to engage with conservation beyond its functional premises, but really what it can reveal about a certain site. And I think that's relevant for the ways in which I thought about my participation in the collaboration with the Jagger Library Memorial Exhibition. So more than just having it as a space for documenting what had occurred, but really thinking about like what is the documentation process actually revealing about how we think about this particular site and the practices that we employ there. And definitely, I was very self-aware about my participation in this process, because part of my job as a researcher on the cultural construction of heritage is oftentimes to pull out the perspectives that certain stakeholders bring to heritage projects, and how, with hindsight, those projects may not have worked out the way that they'd wished. So I have to accept responsibility as a researcher actively engaging in a heritage project that may in the future be critiqued in the same way, to say, well, it could have worked out like this, or it could have worked out like that. However, I find that more and more, not only, more and more as a scholar of heritage, I find it really important to foreground that my positions in certain debates, primarily because heritage is a very political matter. It's highly political whether you want to foreground that or not. And because we're dealing with issues of identity, because we're dealing with issues of sociality and communities, it's important to stake your positions. And I think being involved in a project like this is a way of taking responsibility of your skills and your positionality in the debate, rather than standing from the sidelines and writing about it. And then this is a very tricky question about community. So I may have used the word community in a very laissez-faire way. Of course, there were multiple communities who agreed with or at least identified with the loss of the library. But of course, there were opposing communities that felt, well, there's so much attention being heaped on the University of Cape Town already. Maybe it's a bit overdone to keep pouring more resources into an institution that is already so privileged, for example. So I want to foreground that the idea of community is open-ended and fractured. So, but what about the afterlives? I think one of the learnings that I came out of this project was that there's a parallel between the loss of the library as an institution and an archive, and the fracturing of communities who identify with that institution, and the sense of grief that large parts of the city, as well as our intellectual community and employees, felt was really about that the breaking of the ties between different the ties that held us together. It's also important to emphasize that the disaster occurred in 2021 during the COVID pandemic, when there was already so much social distancing and isolation taking place. So while disasters necessarily bring communities together in this way, it was a little bit amplified under those circumstances. So the salvage and recovery operation was very much about reconstituting different communities after the disaster. I've not done follow-up research on the volunteers, so I cannot say much about the afterlives of the volunteers and how they actually feel. But I can say that the work on recovering and rebuilding the library is ongoing, and yeah, that's the best answer I can give at this point. Thanks.
Thank you, Dwayne. Fariga?
Yes, I like to follow up on Dwayne last point on this community, I think, and then link that to questions, Lydia's questions on this. You know, what would this kind of digitizing effort will do to the Borobudurs? So one thing that really interesting is to compare the Dwayne presentation and my presentation is that Dwayne is talking mostly about how to create the community and co-create the community, the real community. And then, you know, you're working with these volunteers, you're working with these, you know, the actual preservationists and expert. That in my presentation, I'm using the technology to kind of provide some different angles to the question is how do we co-create communities that has a kind of a link to these heritage monuments. And then this is quite interesting to see, and I haven't done more analysis and deeper analysis on that kind of processes. And then I think, but what we can maybe compare to the South African case and also the Borobudur case in this particular, the way how we place technology within this process of co-creation of the community. So this is that the question leads to, you know, a number of different kind of small question or other questions like what do you mean with the values? You know, when you bring community together, what do you mean with or how do you conceptualize there's a process of creating common values that can be applied to understand, you know, the heritage building or heritage monument or heritage object. So this is something that maybe that's why I'm using this the Science and Technology Society angle to see how technology is actually play a very significant role in kind of not only subverting the notion of the values, but also giving a new dimension to the way we understand heritage. So this is something answering Lydia's earlier questions on, you know, the role of anthropology, and I'm using this, you know, my interest in the anthropology of science, technology, and society in order to understand to what extent this technology actually influence or shape the way how we relate, meaning record the heritage building. And I'll give you a small illustrations. In the first stage of our recording process, we use portable cameras. Sony, I forgot the title, the make of this camera, but it was a Sony camera, and we had 3 cameras. we bought that cameras from Japan, and then we use it in Indonesia. But what happened with the camera, because this is small camera, and the location in Borobudur is very, very hot, and the camera quickly malfunctions. So which means that you came to Borobudur, and you have a kind of a understanding that this camera will work because it worked in Japan, with this kind of a climate. But when you bring this technology to Indonesia, then you cannot use this because the climate is different. It's very hot and humid. So this is kind of understanding. As an anthropologist, I find it very interesting because when you try to apply your understanding of technology, it has to be localized. It has to be localized. It's not only oh, this is technology is very nice for presentations and very nice for recording, but when you face and localize, put that into a different practices, different environmental factors, then this kind of a technology doesn't really help you at all. So this is something that answering your question about the role of the anthropology in the sense of as the anthropologist of science and technology. So I have a number of other illustration, but I think the illustration with the camera, it's kind of the best illustration that can answer the questions of this. How technology can also becoming part of the relation between ourselves and also the building. Thank you, Lydia.
Thank you so much. I don't want to keep taking the floor, although I do have more questions, but want to give the audience a chance. Are there any questions in the audience?
Can I ask question?
Yes, of
Later?
course.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question to Bapak Fajar. Just a small question. I'm just wondering, when you mentioned about the, that in Borobudur there is a Rawat Tuat, so of course this Javanese representation of Javanese culture. But you also mentioned Lea. So can you explain a little bit how is the connection with the Lea? Lea is evidently from Bali, right? So how is the connection of this Borobudur? Whether the Borobudur is also actually have a many different festival or just Javanese? Because I know with Rawat Tuat and also from Lima Gunung, something like that. But Lea is just heard about it. So can you explain a little bit of this one, Pak Fajar? Thank you.
Yeah, that's really important and interesting questions. And unfortunately, I didn't have the pictures. I didn't include the pictures in my presentation. But it is there is a connection, but there is also not a connection. So in one of these Rawat rituals that I witnessed in not very far from Borobudur, and then people usually started with Javanese rituals. One of them is like a what is called when you put this the baby on the floor, tedak siten, yeah. So this is part of this one of the part of the Ruat Rawat. Ruat Rawat itself, it's a very generic term that invented by Pak Suchoro. He's the leader, cultural leaders, community leaders in Borobudur, and he's the one who initiated 25 years ago the Ruat Rawat rituals. So basically, the Ruat Rawat performance rituals was carried out every year, and then they invite different communities from around this temple to perform and to make a kind of offering to this temple. So what Pak Suchoro wanted to achieve with these Ruat Rawat rituals, and he wanted to to say that the Borobudur is not only for Javanese. Borobudur is it's because he refers to the UNESCO charters, and then he says that this is a monument of the mankind, which means the values of Borobudur is not only for Javanese, but also can be applied and also can relate to other communities in not only in Indonesia but throughout the globe. So that's why for Pak Choro, including Lea performance in one of these Ruat-Rawat ritual, it's something that is okay, because he said that we are not talking about Javanese cultural performance. We are talking about Borobudur performances that are not only Javanese but also has or symbolic part of a symbolic values that can be found in many other communities in Indonesia. So in several years and various years, he always invited not only from Lea, but from Bali, but also from Kalimantan, from Sulawesi, to take part in the ritual, to take part in the Ruat-Rawat ritual. So this is something that for me it's very interesting to see the way how this Borobudur values is being recreated, and what is really interesting that he is recreating this not from the scratch, but he using the UNESCO charters. UNESCO charters are mentioning that this is the monument of mankind, so forth, blah blah blah, and then using based on this, and then said, you have to respect Borobudur not as a localized monument, but this is a world monument. And the way how you do it is, yes, you invite many other cultures into Borobudur and create the same kind of what I call this cultural landscape. So that's why for me, ontology is the best term to explain this kind of phenomenon. Begitu, Bu.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And actually, it relates to another curiosity I had also about the project that Dwayne was presenting, and that relates a little bit to, and I think the digital in a way also invites engagement with Borobudur from all across the world. But I know also, Dwayne, you in your project, you made the conscious decision to focus on the internal community members, so to say, or potential community members. Whereas even if I look at my own institution, of course, Africa Study Center in Leiden, many people were very distressed about the loss of the library, which they felt also as part of their own of their own in a way. So I'm wondering how that choice came about and what it now means for how other people, how the global community that was also revolved around the Jagger Library, what has happened to that, if you have any ideas?
Thanks, Ludivita. When we when we embarked on a digital documentation initiative of our project, it was out of a recognition that, like, keeping a record of all of the material that we were engaging with, and how and documenting the process was also important for the future record. So there was a kind of anticipation of the importance of this documentation process for future researchers who would be working on this. That's how we engaged with documenting our process, and it was also important for us to keep this repository on UCT servers and to use the technologies that were already available for us through the University of Cape Town. And that was great because it just reaffirmed this generative aspect of the exhibition making process. So whereas Fajar was talking about conservation as a kind of research practice, in our context, it was really about curation as a kind of archival and research practice, right? Like so it's not just about making an exhibition, but also all the stuff that flows out of that exhibition as being documented. I was aware of the many calls for material, and I know how the loss of the Jagger Library affected scholarly communities with a connection to the University of Cape Town, all around the world, in the UK, in the Netherlands, etc. But that was only through the news. And I'm pretty sure that the University of Cape Town Libraries has had some kind of correspondence and engagement with these other institutions, but I'm not privy to that kind of information, and I don't know what kind of exchange took place there. But I know that the Jagger Library is really important as an archive and a repository of African studies materials, and so it is connected to these different institutions. I want to take liberty as a speaker to maybe speak to some of Fajr's points also, because I found it really fascinating. I find this idea that you was just Fajr, you were just talking about a new set of rituals that were developed on site using the power of this inscription of the site as of Borobudur as a specific temple complex, and I find that so fascinating. As a scholar of the construction of cultural heritage, I always marvel at the power of heritage sites to do these things, and for different stakeholders to mobilize the significance of these sites. But I was hoping that you could speak a little bit more. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about this idea of ontology. Like, what do you mean precisely by ontology, and what is ontology doing for you, rather than other sets of terms to describe the essence of the representations that you're trying to engage with? What does ontology bring that's really that really captures exactly what you're trying to get to with your project?
Yeah, well, that's really the question that go into this the center of this my presentations. Thank you, Dwayne. And yes, to answer that, as you might already also knows that there are different ways of conceptualizing ontology, but I using that this concept of ontology in a very basic way as a as the way how people see the world. So this is something that is very simplified. I know that it's very simplified take on the ontology, but there are numbers, But what is really I would like to tease out here is that the way how to see the world, the ontological perspective of the world, is actually connects to these a number of different factors. And what is really interesting in the context of heritage management is that the way how institutions like UNESCO or institution like Indonesian government, for example, or even experts from Japan, experts from the Netherlands or from the Europes, all of this kind of creating an assemblage that shape the way how we look at this the Borobudur as a cultural monument. So one thing that very important part of the ontological creation here is that in 90, as you might already familiar with the way how the UNESCO works, that before 97, before 2000s, I think, that all of these these courses also always revolves into this heritage monument, especially World Heritage Monument, as a monument, as a building, as a physical construct. So this is influenced by this, the European view of a heritage model. But in the 2000, slightly before 2000s, and there is a change in the way how UNESCO see understand what they call the heritage monuments, and they also trying to put forward different views, which mention that the monument is not only about monument, but it's about the also the surrounding context, the landscape and the people and so forth. But what is really important in the Borobudur context, and that kind of view was already brought or introduced by Japanese expert in the 1970s. Those who are involved in the UNESCO construction project. And in fact, the documents, the heritage management documents produced in the 1970s and 1980s, they draw on this kind of a concept of the inseparability of human, building, and the landscape. So this is something that were already going on in Japan. This kind of a perspective that already going on since the early 20th century, even after Meiji Restoration. So they always think that this is heritage monument is not only the building, but it involves all this context and the surrounding, and also the surrounding people, surrounding environment. And then they introduced this concept to Borobudur in the 1970s. But at that time, the UNESCO did not have the regulation, did not have a convention that regulate this one. That's why the Borobudur was considered as one of the first attempt to see or to criticize the concept for heritage monuments that draws from the European model or European understanding of the monument. So this is this kind of ontological, shape of production was very important because it then helped us to at least help to understand people like Mr. Choro when he was working with this new kind of ritual, the Ruat Rawat. He already draw on some of the perspective, the way how they see the Borobudur as a world is not only about building, but it's Borobudur and the surrounding, landscape, surrounding community. So this is for him. This is the ontology, the cultural ontology of the Borobudur. It's not it's not the Borobudur as the Borobudur, but Borobudur as part of this kind of assemblage of people, non-human material, non-human beings, and also environmental materials and so forth. So, yeah, did I answer your question, Dwayne? Thank you, Dwayne.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm seeing that time is passing quickly. If anybody has a last question, this is the moment. Otherwise, I think we will close this meeting because one of our speakers has also to leave to another meeting. I want to thank you both so much for your super fascinating presentations. I'm not a scholar of heritage myself, but maybe I will be in the future. Certainly my curiosity has been triggered a lot. And for me, a takeaway is perhaps not only how we here in the website, this webinar are from different parts of the world, but actually also how heritage has become, heritage making has become a global endeavor in many ways with stakeholders from all over the world. So I think that's very interesting, and a curiosity that I have to ponder upon a little bit more is whether or not we have to start engaging more with the environment as an actor, shaping actually the heritage that we as communities are so much involved in. So I think that's something fascinating to think about further. Thank you very much. Angela, maybe I give you the word for the final closing, and thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Fajar. It was a great pleasure to have you here.
Can I just add a very short point? then because I see that the same kind of thing also taking place in Africa, and especially, you know, like the how this the devotion to a certain kind of geographical features that can be considered as a heritage. And then this is kind of a thing that yeah, you're right, Lide, we can start thinking of maybe doing some kind of comparative work or something with our colleagues in Africa, and looking at this as a global as a kind of the way how we dealing with the ontological difference, not only in Indonesia but in Africa, or maybe in South America, and so forth. So I'm looking forward if we maybe with Dwayne and then with your colleagues in South Africa, we can set up something and talk about, formulate something. I will be happy and will be open to that kind of ideas. Thank you.
Fantastic. Speaking about generative works, I hope that this will also take us further in many different ways. Thank you, Angela. To you the floor for the closing.